talk to me about the Witness. We've seen some, just I guess, more developments, and we've learned a little bit more about the precursors and the origins of the Witness and other versions of the Witness that might exist out there that have differing views. You are definitely have read more into it than I have. So talk to me about the Witness and what we've learned.
So, Bungie apparently loves lore with things going way back being called precursors. If you know Halo, yes, that's linking into that. The Witness was originally made from a civilization which is only referred to by us as the precursors. The Collector's Edition and the video of lore that we got as a cutscene in Season of the Deep, they all add together to give us a more complete picture. Basically, the entire civilization was broken down into factions. And eventually, after the Traveler left, because they tried to merge it with the Veil, one faction prevailed over the others through violence. Though it wasn't their initial choice to do so, they were successful. That faction was called the Penitent. And when all of them were in consensus, they took on to themselves that process of merging and turned into that eusocial giant being called the Witness. The combination of all those different peoples, which is probably the reason why it's got that, series of faces trailing out of its big smoky head. Like those are probably representations of all the precursors that are combined to make the Witness. And they created this being from themselves, but principally it's a being that isn't capable of doubt or dissent. It is ironclad in its perspective and its views, and they have basically indwelled within it the idea that they must commit to fulfilling the final shape, which is why the Witness has been so hell-bent on this. The idea of the final shape is also actually properly described in very important terms, which is that the reason there were factions in this precursor civilization in the first place is because they all disagreed on what the final shape was, right? They'd been given bounty and plenty by the Traveler, but they had no idea what to do with it, right? They had no purpose. And there's a whole bunch of different philosophical ideas, right? The actual successor faction that created the Witness, their beliefs are actually what I would describe as pretty sound and solid, right? They
Reasonable.
believed that with the bounty that they had gained from the Traveler, they believed that it was their job to help uplift the universe and bring life to it and to ultimately shepherd it towards perfection as well, And they did this through action as well as words, right? Like they seeded barren solar systems and brought life to them. This was not a civilization that was hell-bent on dominance. This wasn't a civilization that is really that reflective of the Witness. It's a civilization that genuinely cared. And there were great debates and arguments about whether they should even do this, because another perspective was sitting there and saying that the civilization itself wasn't perfect enough because they had been flawed in their past, because inevitably they're a civilization, they've committed their own evils, they've had their own wars, they've done their own wrongs, right? So they believed that the real perfection could only be accomplished by something greater than them, and as a result, they should stand back and do nothing, because they would just get in the way and ruin things. Like these, there's so many deep ideas when it comes to the various positions of the society that are all reflected in this dialogue, and it all ultimately filters down to this idea of how do we basically attain perfection, which, if you're really looking for a single word answer to what the final shape was supposed to be, that's it. This was the purpose they created for themselves. And when they found the Veil, they believed that they had finally achieved a way of getting to perfection, because they could combine it at last with the light and the dark. And as a result, they would have been able to make a state where they controlled the universe generally. That is the final pursuit of the Witness. In particular, and this leads us on to a really interesting topic from the Final Shape trailer, there are two individuals that we see thanks to the Collector's Edition. I, in my video, nicknamed them Hemingway and Rorschach, but they're actually represented as HMW and RS.
All the greatest names.
And it's a lot catchier to say Hemingway and Rorschach. But these individuals, they go back and forth and they have discussions with each other. And there's long debates and messages regarding the nature of the final shape and whatnot. And it just tells you a lot more about the story of their society. The short version of the story is that by the time the Penitent took over, Hemingway had joined the Penitent and Rorschach had left them. Rorschach left because they were starting to see the devolution of things and they no longer agreed with any of the politics on the Precursor homeworld. And so they basically took a stay of exile where previously they'd been one of the penitent's greatest advocates. And as a result, they escaped from being turned into the Witness. Hemingway embraced the penitent and ultimately is now a part of the Witness. But also, in that last moment where they believe they're going to create a being capable of mastering perfection, Hemingway sends a message to Rorschach and basically says, like, hey, I doubt, I don't know if this thing is actually going to be able to achieve perfection. I hope it will be. If you'd come and join, then I'll know it's capable of perfection because you were wise. And it's just this really fascinating moment that shows that even down in the deeper kernels of the Witness, the things that originally made it up actually are capable of doubt. And it tells us something even more important, which is this. There might be one precursor who's still alive.
Yeah, that's the interesting part.
So this links back into the trailer.
Yeah.
In the middle of the Final Shape trailer that they revealed at the end of the developer showcase, there is a voice in the middle of it, which basically tells us that we should wield this power and that we are the light of hope. It's a female voice. Nobody has ever heard it before, as best I know. I know there are people talking about it being Ikora or Ido, but it doesn't sound like anyone I've ever heard. And if you listen back to it, I think you'll realize that's the case, right?
Definitely a new character.
This is a new character.
And it's aligned with the Traveler.
It's aligned with us, that's for certain. But, like, I think the really important point is that I think there are two possibilities of who it could be, you know? And one of them is that this is just the voice of the Traveler, aka maybe the Gardener even, where it is just this primordial godlike figure who is encouraging you to defend it and therefore defend all of creation. You could be literally listening to a divine voice at that moment, which in itself would be amazing. The other possibility is that it is Rorschach, that it is this one precursor who has survived. It is RS. And at that point, you have a foil to the Witness, a counter to it. And that leads to its own amazing story beats. If we do sit and have this grand moment where suddenly we encounter a precursor of all things, and we actually get that context, suddenly we've met the oldest being in the universe, except for maybe the Traveler in the Veil. And that in itself is fascinating. If they are even close to being a part of the story, I'd be really intrigued to see what's going on. And even if they're not, maybe they're still out there in the universe. And if they're still out there, I imagine they have a few things to say, right?
Yeah.
Based on just, they've been around. They're dumb old if they're still alive at this point.
They've seen some stuff. But that voice in the trailer was very easy to miss, and it just sounded like another just a female character speaking to you and telling you to use the prismatic energy, whatever it is. But it's definitely nothing we've seen before and seems to be something related to the Traveler. And the collector's edition Bungie always very deliberate when it comes to collector's edition and putting deep lore in there. It's always very dense, but there's always very important story beats that tie into the main story. And especially them setting up that there are two different or multiple different precursors and factions and beings that disagree. The Witness isn't just this one singular thing of all these people that agree with each other. There is actually some alternating. So it would make sense if we're trying to find a way to defeat the Witness that maybe we get the help of one of their predecessors that doesn't agree with them, and they're going to show us some secrets or some weak spots or how to take them down. But yeah, I think things looking very good for Destiny right now. For the first time in like 6 months, or maybe even technically a year. Lightfall hasn't been the greatest year for Destiny, but as we've seen, back against the wall Bungie is a very strong Bungie, and after there's always a rough time, it is always like I went through it at the beginning, but there's always a cycle of anytime there's a rough bad time for Destiny, it's followed by a very strong time. So this looks like it's going to be that. Final Shape, by all accords, I think most people thought it, but I think most people agree Final Shape will be good. It's looking like a very good expansion, and it's good to have proper confirmation, because just from what we've seen, it's looking very solid. The episodes after remains to be seen. I'm sure they'll be very similar to Seasons. I'm sure they'll be good. Whether Destiny 2 gets another expansion, maybe in a year, 2 years time, we'll have to wait until what Bungie announce, and then whether, of course, Destiny 3 comes after that, which is looking very likely, just based on like kind of logic, but also based off Luke Smith's hints, but also based off the Reddit post. I think Destiny 3 is on the horizon. So I think things are looking good for the first time in a while for Destiny.
It feels like the ship is headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
And it's not as even if it's not official confirmation from Bungie, it's nice to know there's some good stuff on the horizon. I think especially after we beat the Witness and after the Final Shape ends, that's when, because Bungie aren't going to want to talk about Destiny 3 before Final Shape, because they want all the energy to be on Final Shape. This is the thing, and then after that, they're not going to be like, oh yeah, like let's talk about this bigger thing, because everyone would care about Destiny 3 way more than Final Shape. Although I do believe it would kind of make players a bit more feel more secure that this franchise isn't coming to an end. I think right now they're focused on Final Shape, and I think after that, I think they're going to make some really interesting announcements. But